The tariff actions taken by US President Donald Trump against Canada, China, and Mexico have accelerated the global agenda. As you are aware, China faces tariffs of up to 60% on certain products, while Canada and Mexico face 25% tariffs. Trump was next in line for Europe.
It will definitely happen with the European Union, I can tell you that.
This time, Trump targeted the European Union with his tariff decisions, and this will undoubtedly happen. While the EU group was assessing the situation in light of Trump's tax announcements, the United States president made shocking claims that the EU tariffs would be announced very soon, and that the United Kingdom would need to work on this issue for some time. These statements caused great concern among EU member states. President Emmanuel Macron of France made a crucial rebuttal. We will now go over the specifics of these significant messages from Macron, as well as how other EU member states responded to his remarks on tariffs. But first, please remember to subscribe to our channel. Macron made remarks on tariffs that most likely even Donald Trump would not have anticipated. French President Emmanuel Macron surprised everyone by saying that member states would be able to retaliate against US tariffs in the event of an attack on EU interests, as EU leaders called for negotiations in response to Donald Trump's threat of high tariffs. Speaking on the fringes of the unofficial EU Defense Summit in Brussels, Emmanuel Macron emphasized that Europe, as a surviving power, must make sure that it is respected if the US picks up the pace on trade issues. As a result, Macron called for a more robust and coordinated response to pressures from global trade. The French leader emphasized that in order for Europe to become less dependent on foreign powers, it must improve its industrial and technological infrastructure, raise defense spending, and take a strategic economic approach. Additionally, he promoted an action plan that prioritizes European industry in procurement decisions, reforms the European Investment Bank's financing mechanisms, and increases financing from the public and private sectors. Emmanuel Macron urged EU allies to follow France's lead in increasing defense spending, stating that Europe must cooperate in important areas. These remarks were perceived as a retaliatory action by Macron during a period of escalating worries about trade tensions with the US after President Donald Trump took office. In other words, Macron was already preparing to counter US President Donald Trump's anti-European rhetoric. The French industry minister, Marc Ferracci, contended that trade negotiations with Washington ought to involve some form of power dynamic. According to Ferracci, for any response to be successful, it must be tough and concentrate on goods that are significant to the US. The governor of the Bank of France, François Villeroy de Galhau, declared that Trump's current tariffs were draconian. François Villeroy de Galhau stated that these tariffs are a concerning development that will raise economic uncertainty. The EU group also went into greater detail on the subject. The foreign policy chief of the bloc, Kaja Kallas, stated that a trade war would not have any winners. According to European Council President Antonio Costa, member states of the EU concurred with Secretary-General Mark Rutte of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that a more robust European defense would also fortify the transatlantic alliance. According to Mr. Rutte's assessment, the United States stands to gain significantly more as defense spending increases, and Donald Trump will have a much stronger hand in the tariff competition. Mark Rutte stated that the United States sells much more defense equipment to Europe than vice versa, and that there is a lot of money floating around, and more to come, as European NATO allies increase their defense spending. European nations also supported French leader Emmanuel Macron's opposition to US tariffs, arguing that the EU should take more action against the US for Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who feels that Europe and the United States are interdependent, emphasized that a trade war is a mistake, and that every effort should be made to keep allies from fighting in the face of the Russian threat or Chinese expansionism. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz stated that the EU is powerful enough to respond to any US trade tariffs, but their goal is to open the door for cooperation while the leaders called for more communication with Washington amid rising tensions over tariff competition and the failure to fully resolve the issues. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen stated that Copenhagen would never support a war with allies in general, but that if the Trump administration imposes tough tariffs on Europe, it will face a collective and strong response. That Michael Martin, the Prime Minister of Ireland, stated that the EU and the US should cooperate on trade, since protectionism harms people everywhere they live. According to Finnish Prime Minister Pet Oppo, Europe should engage in trade negotiations with Trump. He also stated that Russia poses the greatest threat to Europe. Luc Frieden, the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, stated that trade tariffs are always bad, and that the solution is to respond with similar measures. The economy of Spain. Carlos Cuo contended that the parties should not be naive and will defend their businesses to ensure that they can compete on an even playing field. Despite ministers, Carlos Queiro's assertion that the EU is open to trade and in favor of a globalized market. While most EU leaders agreed with French President Emmanuel Macron's remarks, their main stance was that dialogue should be used to resolve the tariff issue. Emmanuel Macron, on the other hand, has been the most vocal EU leader in recent days regarding Donald Trump's plans to impose tariffs on the EU, given that Trump signed a number of executive orders on the first day of his second term that withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Change Agreement and the World Health Organization. He had already hinted that he was about to blow cold winds. Therefore, if Trump chooses to impose additional tariffs, rather than reach an agreement with France, how will this affect the future of the two nations? Following Nicolas Sarkozy's election as President of France in 2007, known as the American Revolution, political ties between France and the United States improved. On July 12, 2017, Sarkozy declared that he was proud of his moniker following the worsening of relations between the United States and France. President Emmanuel Macron invited US President Donald Trump to travel to France in April 2018 after Macron spoke to the US Congress and stated his intention for the US to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord in order to combat climate change. In late 2018, US Congressman Thomas Massie made the alarmist claim that Macron was a socialist, militarist, globalist scientist. Trump made fun of Macron over tariffs and nationalism. France's World War II defeat, plans for a European army and the French. Leaders' approval ratings. This followed Trump's Armistice Day visit to Paris, which was heavily criticized both in France and in the United States. In December, Macron criticized Trump for his decision to withdraw United States troops from Syria in April 2019. France's outgoing ambassador to the United States, Gerard Arro, described the Trump administration and the United States as isolated in November 2019. Macron questioned the United States' commitment to Europe. Now, Donald Trump's latest move to impose tariffs on the EU has further strained ties between the United States and France. Although the two countries have had a bumpy relationship so far, Trump's tariff decision may bring disadvantages for both. The United States and France, in order to understand these downsides more clearly, it is necessary to consider the economic ties between the two countries prior to Trump's decision to impose tariffs. The United States and France enjoyed a strong and mutually beneficial economic partnership after French-American trade rebounded sharply after the COVID-19 pandemic, hitting all-time highs in 2022 before declining even though there were no significant issues between the United States and France in 2023, bilateral trade levels remained higher than they were prior to the pandemic, primarily because of declining energy prices and decreased French beverage exports and cruise ship activity. The amount of goods traded between the two nations decreased by 12.4 billion euros from 2022 to 97 billion euros in 2023 due to economic fluctuations. French customs data indicates that while France's trade surplus was 15.9 billion EUR in trade, and services, imports, and exports decreased in all major product categories, increased by about 2% to 70.4 billion EUR in 2023. French imports of services rise by 1.7% to 27.3 billion and exports of goods by 1.7% to 43.2 billion EUR. Correspondingly, in both cases down one place from the year before, the United States was France's fourth biggest consumer and fifth biggest supplier in 2023. Following 4 years of surpluses, the bilateral trade balance dropped modestly to a deficit of 13.3 billion in 2022, which was negative once more. The 2023 deficit came at 6.6 billion EUR aeronautical industry. Medicines and beverages drove French exports to the United States in 2023. Comparatively to 2022, all three categories of commodities fell, particularly beverage exports, which dropped by 1 billion euros or 26% broke records in terms of drop. Furthermore, among the sectors, with the biggest drop in exports were cruise ships and ships including pharmaceuticals, driven by rising wind turbine exports, general-purpose machinery, and tools ranked fourth behind. Cosmetics and perfumes. Although the United States and France's economic ties have been rising and then declining as witnessed, the economic dynamics have been preserved free from any conflict between the two nations. But today, given Donald Trump's actions, additional economic issues between France and the United States are to be anticipated. This might compel France to search for other economic alliances, which nation therefore might France choose above the United States with high-level talks, cooperation agreements, and mutual commitments on world events. The relationship between China and France has changed significantly in recent years. In April 2023, French President Emmanuel Macron visited Beijing, marking a significant turning point in Sino-French ties. During the visit, both countries signed new agreements, indicating a strengthened bond. Specifically, they urged the world community to handle the spillover consequences in several spheres and pledged to help resolve the Ukrainian crisis through discussion. Following this conference, a more detailed survey revealed Chinese President Xi Jinping's appreciation of the positive influence of their economic relations by signing 18 cooperation agreements on behalf of French and Chinese businesses. On his first trip to Europe in 5 years, officials showed new hope and emphasized the benefits of contact. In May of the following year, she met Macron in Haute-Pyrénées, France in 2024. While MCR emphasized the need to maintain Europe's strategic independence while forging closer ties with China, she also highlighted China's commitment to national unity and cross-cultural contacts with France, reflecting cooperative efforts to improve collaboration and stabilize world affairs. Their discussions covered a wide range of global issues, thus reinforcing mutual pledges to improve ties not only between China and France, but also with the European Union. These recent occurrences demonstrate how important Sino-French ties are becoming on the global stage. Actually, the two countries' early histories showed somewhat more varied interactions beginning in the 17th century. France and China have a rich and complex past. Following France's recognition of Taiwan, relations between the two countries soured in the middle of the 20th century, and diplomatic ties were suspended. France was fairly heavily traded in China in the 19th and early 20th centuries. After France and China re-established diplomatic relations in 1964, the two countries have frequently engaged in high-level talks, reached various agreements, and seen their relationships grow. However, political ideologies and systems have posed challenges for the alliance, and the issues that separate France and China have become less apparent in recent years. One notable shift in the relationship was the establishment of the Franco-Chinese Strategic Alliance in 2004, which aims to promote cooperation in areas like trade, business culture, and education. This cooperation enhanced ties between the two countries and paved the way for more general cooperation in many areas. In 2015, Both countries reaffirmed their commitment to addressing global warming and promoting sustainable development by signing the China-France Joint Declaration on Climate Change. This joint announcement significantly aided the climate change negotiations that resulted in the Paris Agreement later that year. Since taking office in 2017, French President Emmanuel Macron has made strengthening France-China economic and cultural ties his top priority.